All right. Well, like I said, thank you. Thank you for being here. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it. I
absolutely.
was
Thanks for.
hoping. Oh, what was that? I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say thanks for having me. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. My pleasure. I was just hoping we could start with just a brief review of like sort of the school that you go to, your majors, minors, sort of any organizational involvements that you have, and you can go into as much detail or as little detail as you like, just to just give us a sense of sort of like what your academic sort of situation is and your general sort of thrust.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually just graduated in May from Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. Yeah. Woohoo.
Bravo.
And I was a major in English literature,
Mm,
and I actually minored in theater arts,
mm,
and I got a certificate in medieval and Renaissance studies. So
mm.
I'm into the old stuff. But I was actually the treasurer for my school's chapter of Sigma Tau Delta, and
Mm.
which was such an awesome experience. I found such a loving community in both Sigma Tau Delta and my English department. I just sing the Columbus State University praises. If anyone is in Georgia and thinking about schools, that's, Columbus State has a really phenomenal English program. And I was also at my school, I was the president of a creative writing club called the Creative Cougar Coalition, which is an inherited name. And I was the social media manager for our student paper, The Uproar, which was fun
Oh,
and interesting and learned a lot about social media that I maybe didn't need to know in that short tenure. But it was a smaller school, but I really loved it. And yeah, had a great
awesome.
time.
Fantastic. All right. Well, um, I guess my first question for you then would be, um, why higher education? Because generally speaking, there's this big movement of sorts of people that are saying like, oh well, you don't need to go to college to pursue your dreams and yada yada yada. So, what made you decide to go to college in the first place, and like, what was you know, why did you go that route as opposed to, I don't know, being an entrepreneur or just like, I don't know, doing something else?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation that I've actually been having with my family in the past couple of days because it there is like this big push of people being like, you don't need college, which I think that
Right.
some people don't need college. I've met a ton of people
Sure.
in my life who are just like, I didn't need it. My dad didn't go to college. He went to a trade school and he's wildly successful in his field. And but I think for me, college was always my big plan. I looked forward
Mm.
to college my whole academic career, and I really liked school. I was kind of a dork growing up, so I was the loser who always had a book with me and that kind of thing. So
Ah,
I
that's
think it was
not being a
always sort
loser
of,
at all.
I know, right? It's the cool kid club now. I've got three bookshelves in my bedroom, but I think it was always sort of part of my big plan, and I love being in a classroom. I love having the conversations that you have, especially in a literature class. I mean,
Mm.
getting to talk about these words that were written sometimes like centuries ago. I think
Yeah.
it's such a beautiful communal thing with the people around us understanding each other and also, across generations. I think education for the sake of education is something that should be preserved. I think that we've been preserving things like Beowulf for so long that at some point,
Sure.
kind of just keep it going because it's beautiful and there's so much history in it. So I think for me, it was sort of ingrained in me young that books are important and reading's important and school's important. And I took that to heart and I am so glad that I did because I just really love where I am right now.
Nice. Nice. And so, are you going to be like going like for further education after this, like master's, PhD,
I
or still
hope
figuring
so.
it out?
I hope so. I put in a couple applications this past cycle, and got a couple yeses, couple no's.
Mm.
But I ended up deciding after talking to some professors and actually some other folks at Sigma Tau Delta conference that a gap year is a great idea. So I
Sure.
took the jump and decided to take a year off and just kind of catch my breath and put my applications in when I was a little bit more rejuvenated because, senior year stress is real. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do definitely plan on pursuing another degree, at least one other degree. We'll see, but that's currently in the plan. So hopefully this time next year I'll have some more concrete
Sure.
higher education plans. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out. I totally think a gap year is super helpful. I mean, I had several gap years before I.
Yeah. That's what I hear. That seems to be the advice of lots of people.
Well, yeah, because I think there's, it's very tempting to sort of go back to back when it comes to education. You go
Yeah.
through K through 12, and then you go to college, and after that you go to masters, and I, just as a sort of a personal anecdote thing, one of my students, she is a PhD student. Well, because I teach English online. She's a PhD student from China, living in the UK, and she is into economics and such. But she is kind of like, I guess I kind of like economics. I kind of don't. I'm not really quite sure what I'm doing. And it's because of that thing being pushed, sort of having school
Yeah.
back to back to back. And, I think there's obviously value and in that for sure. But there can be a lot of like, what am I really doing this for?
Yeah.
If I'm just sort of going through the process, but I don't really know what I'm going for, you can then be stuck in this limbo. And then there can be this sort of sunk cost fallacy that happens as well, where it's like, well, I've
Yeah,
already
totally.
put so much literal money and time and whatnot into these things. I have to keep going, right?
Yeah, and actually, I started Columbus State University. The reason I ended up there was because I was a theater major, and they have a really good theater program. So
Mm,
I spent my first 2 years of college as a theater major, and
mm,
then COVID hit, and I got sent home, and I was like, "What am I?" I had some time to like evaluate what am I doing, and I kind of
yeah,
realized that I wasn't really looking towards plays and musicals and things like that. I was
right.
looking at my books, and that was what was bringing me comfort, and I was like, "What a beautiful thing to." Turn to something for comfort. And I changed my major while I was during like the COVID send home
Mm,
era. So yeah, I think that taking some time to breathe is probably a good idea. So that's, yeah, my advice to people is to breathe.
right. Well, I mean, that's one of
Yeah.
the weird silver linings a bit of the
Yeah.
pandemic and being shut in, is that it gave people a little bit more of an environment that incentivized them to think a little bit more about, why am I working this job? Why am I in this
Yep.
major? Whatever it is. Of course, that's just a silver lining, though. Compared to
Yeah.
everything else that
In a
happened,
very
it's not
dark
great.
cloud. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about your passion and your interest, because you said that your English lit major, that you like sort of medieval stuff. But tell us a little bit more about sort of, if you have any more of a specific thing that you want to maybe to go towards, or just like, I just want to focus more on this general area, and why.
Yeah, that's the big question. I'm
No
super,
pressure.
yeah, like I said, I know, right? I'm super into the medieval stuff. I took a medieval lit class in my first semester as an English major that
Mm,
focused pretty much solely on Arthurian legend.
mm,
And I was like, this is, so cool. I totally fell in love. And I've been kind of taking a quest on my own Arthur exploration since then. And I'm really interested in specifically Arthur, like how that legend is so old and it's still going. The Green Knight movie just came out,
yeah.
last summer or something, and that's 100% a part of Arthurian legend. Like it's a living
Yep.
legend, and I think it's so fun to track, from Bede to, Mallory to Mark
Mm-hmm.
Twain into like this, like it's such a cool way to track our progress. So while I do like the old stuff, I think I like its practical application and
Mm,
how we're seeing that kind of legend, even how Shakespeare gets translated, how I did a class and read a play by Sir Thomas Kidd, who I'd never read before.
mm,
And seeing all of the things that he invented, I was like, there were so many big literary things that he like was the founding father of. So I think tracking the legacy is something that's super important to me, just for the sake of having things that people have loved for hundreds of years. I think that's my
mm-hmm.
biggest motivation. That being said, I am also big into contemporary stuff. I sort of
Mm,
read all across the board. I'm a big Kurt Vonnegut fan. I
mm.
have been getting really into Octavia Butler recently, which I don't usually do sci-fi, but Octavia Butler has been like
Sci-fi
taking a
where
big
it's at.
place in my
That's, I'm
heart.
telling you.
Yeah, I hadn't been. I kind of only read like the Star Trekky side of sci-fi, and I didn't
Ah,
realize it
gotcha.
included like Lord of the Rings and like all of this
Right.
other stuff that I think is
I
so
feel like you
cool.
would
And
love Le Guin.
she's on my reading list. That
Yeah, I
yeah,
think you'll love her.
that's I've got a whole list. I've got my reading list planned out till February, which is ridiculous. But I was like, if I'm gonna do my gap year, I'm gonna do it right.
Well, you
So
should totally
yes,
share that list with me, by the way, because I would
I
love to
yeah,
read more
I
sci-fi.
will. It's really dramatic, but it's yeah. So, but I have a problem of going into a literature class, and it's especially like the period ones, and being like, this is what I want to study. I love this specifically, and
Mm,
then I have it for all of the classes that I take. So I'm a little bit across the board right now, but I think the
mm,
medieval stuff is sort of what's been sticking. But I think my biggest passion comes from like being able to talk about literature with like-minded people and getting to the bottom of theories that I didn't think of, and having those
sure.
conversations that are so exciting and lovely, and
Yeah.
writing really in-depth analyses that no one cares about. So I think that's
Oh, I think
I'm
there
a
are plenty
little
of people.
yeah, I think the JSTOR community, I'm
Mm,
big into JSTOR these days. So yeah, I think
yeah.
that's my long-winded way of saying I like everything.
Sure. Well, I mean, I guess my follow-up to that would be, where are all the, how do you pronounce them? The salons at? That where are the modern salons?
Yeah, where are
Like,
they? They need to come back because that would be like home for me. Yeah, totally.
yeah,
We should bring it back.
right. I feel like the modern book club is just like a watered down version of
Yeah,
that. But
yeah,
we need
for
to bring
sure.
it in
And
its original form.
exactly, totally. Lots of hoity-toity outfits and drinking weird drinks and talking really annoying long lengths of time. That's what I'm here for.
Oh, right. Well, I appreciate that insight. Yeah, I feel like that, especially when it comes to sort of tracking Arthurian legend as it sort of goes throughout
Mhm.
history, you could even potentially take like a sociological analysis to that, because you could be using that as a way to like, oh, you have this medium, this story that is, you could call it like your constant. There's this the actual story, and then how does that change depending on the time period, and you could actually sort of use that as a way to analyze the values of that specific region, and sort of maybe the zeitgeist of that time or whatever.
Oh, totally. I mean, I just read
Yeah.
Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court for the first time, and I was like blown away. First of all, by the humor, but then also the social commentary that Mark Twain is doing in that book.
Mm,
I mean, he's got these moments. There's one specific moment that he's got these children that are playing a slave game. They're pretending to be a slave master and the slaves,
mm,
and the Connecticut Yankee is like, "What is this? Is insane. This is crazy. What are these children doing, mimicking their?" And it's that kind of social commentary, and the
mm,
Connecticut Yankees' distinct perspective as a time traveler going back to King Arthur's court is so crazy cool, because you've got him, giving King Arthur a haircut and like just ridiculous stuff paired right next to these really sharp social commentaries, and
mm,
Twain saying this wouldn't happen in our modern day Connecticut. This isn't what it's like.
right.
But then you've got future people like Octavia Butler writing Kindred about Dana going back from the 70s into basically contemporary with a Connecticut Yankee,
Yeah.
and showing with that time travel like the insane social ways that things are happening. So I think
Mm,
I totally think there's so much merit in seeing how these stories change. And I'm
mm,
endeavoring to do something similar to that with, I'm writing an essay on the Green Knight and comparing it to the original Gawain story. And I think it's so cool how even the motifs have changed. I mean, the Endless Knot
mm.
is, I don't know if you've seen the Green Knight movie yet. I highly
Yes.
recommend if you haven't. It's so
No, it
good.
was great. Yeah.
Um, it's
I mean, very
phenomenal.
different
Yeah.
from the
And it's
original story, but very
super
good.
different. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, the perfect point. I mean, there's so many symbols and motifs that are minimized and things that are completely new and brought in that I think are just, it's so telling of what modern audiences want, what we find
Hmm.
useful in a story. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say I super I mean, of course, it's like it's the latest version, so it's gonna have the latest practical effects. But I really liked their depiction of the Green Knight. I mean, very
Oh,
different
yeah.
than how it's described, I think, in the story. But I
Yeah.
just thought that was a really cool, creative take on the Green Knight. Like
It's so
you
cool.
felt the otherworldliness of the Green Knight
Yeah.
for sure.
100%. And the air of mystery is so much more. I think he's such a more mysterious character in the film than he is in the original story. Because in the original, it's just like green dude, green horse, and you find out his identity at the end. But
Right.
in the film, you're just like, what is this monster from another world? And it's just it. Yeah, I totally. I think that's one of the most effective things that David Lowery did. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right. Well, I would love to sort of shift focus a little bit from your own sort of personal interest to your experience in sort of the educational environment that you were in, or environments, I should say. Because my own sort of personal stake in having these conversations is that has a lot to do with my own personal and professional interest in pedagogy and sort of education broadly speaking, but as well as education on sort of the micro level with particular classes. Because in my own experience, I grew up mostly homeschooled, K through 12. So a lot of my own learning was sort of by myself. So in some ways, I'm a bit of an autodidact. But then I did have a small, like 2 years where I was in a private school in high school. And then I go to a community college after that and then transfer to university. And so I've sort of have my fingers in all the different sort of environmental or educational environments. And so I'm really curious to hear about other people's perspectives, because I've noticed that in some I work better than others, and I'm really curious to figuring out what those mechanisms are. So my question for you is, what do you think were some of the biggest difficulties for you when it came to, being an undergrad student, whether it be having to deal with like rent and then, classes, whether it be the classroom dynamics, whether, it be just whatever. What do you think were some of the biggest things that got in your way from being sort of the best student that you could be, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got, those of us who are in college these days, the pandemic is a super go-to answer. I mean,
Sure.
I was a freshman 2018 to 2019, and that was before times. And then halfway through my sophomore year, got cut off and sent home. And then I actually, coming back for my third year of university, it was fall of 2020, but I lived really far from my campus here in Athens, about a 3-hour drive to Columbus. So I chose to move back into the dorms, even though most of my classes were online. But I wanted, I missed Columbus, I missed dorm life, and it was, Athens, there was just some issues going on for me at the time. So I was on campus for all of my third year and then my fourth year, which a lot of people weren't, especially for my third year. I remember coming back for my last year, this previous fall, and being like, there's so many people on campus. I couldn't find parking. I was like giving directions. People were in my spot in the library, like all of this stuff where I didn't even recognize before that campus was so busy. But now that I had seen it so completely dead empty, it was like shocking to me. But I think that I'm definitely the kind of person that I need to be in a classroom and feeling like I'm accountable, because I really like those, the connection between student and professor, I think is like so important. And I ended up, a lot of my classes, like during the, directly post-COVID thing, they were hybrid classes, and small universities, small class sizes, and some of them had options to come in person and then have people be on Zoom. But there were days when many of my classes where I was the only person besides the professor in the room, and everyone else was on Zoom, which was kind of, I mean, I don't know how many people can relate to that, but it's wacky. It's a wacky feeling to be the only person. So yeah, and with Zoom classes, no one, teacher asks a question, everyone's kind of just like, black screens. So I ended up.
Well, it's easier to do that on Zoom than it is like in a class, right?
Exactly.
Because at least there's an air of awkwardness in a physical class, whereas on Zoom it's like,
And that's part of the reason that I went to class in the first place, is because I'm the kind of person who, if I'm not feeling like I'm held accountable, I totally blank out, So I think that it was kind of nice for me because I felt like I had a one-on-one tutor sesh every class period, but it was awkward because I was like, I felt the loss of connection. And when I was on Zoom, I felt so frustrated and lost, and like I wasn't getting as much out of it. So I think that especially is something that was really a tough obstacle for me, but I do think it made me sort of a better student in the same way, because I got a little annoying. And I know when I came back for my senior and classes were all, in person, but with masks, I'm sure that some of my classmates would call me out as being so obnoxious, because I was like, I have an opinion again. But it was, it was a wacky time. And I think that's probably the biggest, and even, library not having regular hours. I'm a big library studier, so not being able to access my favorite study space is like such a drag, and even now things aren't our library still isn't back up to the hours that it was before
Mm,
pre-pandemic. So I think that's probably the biggest obstacle, I guess, which I'm sure most people can relate to. And then,
sure.
procrastination is kind of a constant. I'm a big
Yeah.
procrastinator. So
Yeah.
if someone could make a cure to that, I would, be first in line. But
What do you
I
think
think
is
those are my,
behind that, by the way? Like that's
oh
something that I
gosh.
see is consistent among people of all um, aptitude levels in my experience,
Yeah.
where regardless of whether you're like really good at a particular subject or not, I've noticed that procrastination is just such a big thing. What do you
Yeah.
think
I
is
mean,
maybe behind that?
I'm tempted to give the boomer way out and say my phone because I know most of the time that
Sure.
I'm procrastinating, I'm like doom scrolling on Instagram, which is like
Sure.
the worst feeling in the world. But I mean, even talking to my mom about her experience when she was in college, she tells me that she used to put off papers until the last minute and write them in the
Mm,
library at the very last second. So I think it's partly human nature and
mm,
our even I mean it's funny when you procrastinate something that you want to be doing. Like I procrastinate my reading list all the time, even though these are things that I like so
sure.
desperately want to be reading. So I think just at some point human nature and I had a friend in high school who like never procrastinated. She went home and she did her homework all night and then she came to school and I was like, what do you I was like, can I borrow your homework? I don't even know we had homework. Like this is crazy.
Uh huh.
But yeah, that's one of those things where I think my phone definitely I find when I turn my phone off, my friends and family hate me because I turn my phone off all the time or I'm like always on do not disturb. And I think it helps up my level of not procrastinating. So
Sure.
I think that definitely helps, but I think at some point it's just a basic human instinct, tragically.
Mm,
But once again, if
yeah.
anyone watching this has the answer to procrastination, hit me up because I'm very interested in that information.
Well, yeah, I wonder if it's maybe a kind of I don't know what the specific term for it is, but I know there's a tendency with the human brain as well as I think it's just like a law of nature where you're just going to go with what takes the least amount of effort. So you're conserving energy.
Yep.
Um, and
Yeah.
so I think that might be part of the sort of the human nature thing where we're just going to go with the thing that's
Yeah.
sort of easier to do just more naturally. And then phones sort of
Yeah.
amplify
Totally.
that because there's so many just other things you can do on a phone or a computer, just like
Oh
go
yeah.
on YouTube or,
Yeah.
go into
So
Netflix or
easy.
whatever.
Yeah. I mean, writing in a paper and then finding yourself in YouTube is like the worst feeling in the world. I had times where I literally locked my phone and computer in a different room and like wrote with a pen and paper when I was like super stuck because I was like, there is nothing that's going to keep me off of my stupid phone, despite how much I
Yeah,
want to be doing this. But yeah, I totally agree. The easy way out is definitely where my brain goes most of the time.
for sure, for sure. When it's also not helpful that a lot of various platforms and such are sort of designed in a way to, at least as far as I'm aware, to exploit some psychological sort of ticks in the
Yeah,
human brain, which feels super unfair when you've got like
I know,
an
right?
AI that's like exploiting your own psychology.
Yeah,
It's like I get it, you want to make
people,
money,
yeah,
but I also have things I want to do.
I know. And it's funny because people, I feel like it's all connected. All of the people who want us to make money and be productive are also like, us this easy out. And I'm like, can't have it both ways, guys. Come on,
Yeah, exactly,
killing me here.
exactly.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Well, what are your do you have any thoughts on how you would improve the educational environments that you've been in or that you're sort of vaguely aware of? Whether it be reducing the cost of tuition or whether it be I don't know, like smaller classes, or do you have any ideas of on how you would make our classrooms better, as well as just sort of education broadly? Anything that comes to mind for you?
Yeah. So free tuition,
Mm,
you know, I think education is a basic human right. And I'm, I'm half French on my dad's side. So I have cousins who
mm.
live in France and
Oh,
when we
nice.
talk about, I'm like, I talk about my tuition and they're like, what? Like they're
Yeah.
completely blown away because they were like, that is crazy, first of all.
Yeah.
So I think that, and they're all, I mean, I've got one of my cousins is a chemist and the other is a biology teacher. And like, they're super, super brilliant folks. And their cost of higher education was so significantly lower. And I'm not saying that France is the height of education or
Right.
government, and we shouldn't be looking to them at all. But I think that yeah, tuition should because it's insane looking at your student loan bill and being like, okay, just ignore that for a couple more years and then
Yeah.
it'll be terrible. But I also think, as far as classroom interaction, it's, I feel really tempted to be like, the way that I learn is the best way because it's all I know. But I know that so many
Sure.
people have. I have a roommate who never wrote anything down all of
Mm.
college, and she's brilliant. She gets everything done, gets her assignments turned in on time, and she does it all. And I need to write notes, or else I like lose my mind. So
Sure.
I think working with different students' ways of learning, having methods for different students, it shouldn't be forcing students to sit in a lecture and write notes. That doesn't work for some people. So I think having options like that. But I also had the extreme fortune of being taught by a wonderful professor, Dr. Susan Rock,
Mm.
who just wrote a book very recently about, I think it's called Minding Bodies. I could be wrong about that, but
Ooh.
it's all about like movement in classrooms and how students aren't brains on sticks.
Ah.
And her classes were insanely amazing. She did such an amazing, I sing her praises daily. But she always got us up and moving. I had a
Mm.
9:30 Renaissance class with her this past semester, and one morning she literally had about 15 of us, college students, on our feet dancing at 9:30 in the morning. And we were excited. She was like, can you guys dance for me? We were like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we respected her so much. We knew it had a purpose. And I mean, she was all about physical learning and
Hmm.
having different, we were up and standing and walking around and writing things out and presenting to each other. And I think that kind of communication, first of all, I was way closer with all of the people in that class than any other class.
Sure.
The community that I built in that class, I mean, it was, you know, completely otherworldly.
Hmm.
And I remember I retained so much from that class because I can remember reading passages in specific places in this one classroom.
Right.
It's just it was a phenomenal experience. So I think just the sit down and lecture method, while it's something that works really great for me, it's not working for a lot of people. So I think
Mm.
taking a look at how students are being taught, along with, it shouldn't be you come in, you do your 4 years sitting down in a classroom, you get a degree, you go out and be in a job. That method is just so outdated, and it needs to change because students are experiencing burnout and it's not working because of that. So I
For
think
sure.
a lower tuition and a more compassionate way of interacting with students can really, really make a difference.
Fantastic. I love that idea. The idea of using movement in classes. Because, would you
Yeah.
remind me really quick? What was her name? I'm writing down so I can look
Yeah,
up the book
it's
later.
Dr. Susan Rock, but Rock, I'm gonna be a dork. I think I have it somewhere. Oh, you know what? It's downstairs. Her name is spelled with an H though. It's Hrack, I believe. Um,
ACK.
but I can definitely like email that to you later
Oh,
because
that
I
would
know
be
I bought her
fantastic.
book before I left school because I was like, this is, I mean, in her classes, I only took two classes with her in the 2 years I was an English major, but I was like,
Hmm.
she's brilliant. It was,
Yeah.
I got so much out of her classes. So, and all of the materials that we had from, she did a Shakespeare class that I was in. That was my first class with her.
Mm.
And the whole semester we were working on one like portfolio. So we all had our own Google site, which I had never
Mm.
used Google site before, but we each built a different page for each play we studied and then
Nice.
presented it to each other. And it was just a phenomenal way for all of us to go out and do our own research and then compile it and have it around. So I've still got that, and it's a really great resource. And I add to it. I just reread Macbeth and did a whole page on Macbeth for my own to keep it. And
Nice.
if I ever need to look back, it's there. So I think yeah, she's brilliant. I sing her praises once again, and I will definitely can send you over her that title of that book because it's
Thank
good.
you. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. Yeah. I think, I mean, I haven't done a whole lot of research on it, but I'm pretty sure I've seen research on how movement, kinesthetic movement specifically, is just helps it just overall with just sort of like brain
yeah.
activity and such. I know there's that famous quote or slogan amongst philosophers of, was it Salvator ambulando, which is solved by walking. Um, and I
Ah,
know in my own personal
that's great.
experience, it's very true.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's the movement it changes everything. And there were days where she would be like, okay, you have this passage, you have this passage, you guys go walk and talk and come back in 25 minutes and we'll talk about it. And we got
Mm,
so much out of that. And even the compassion that I felt in her class is something that I also want to harp on, because
mm.
there were days when we would come in and she'd be like, "You guys look terrible." And we'd be like, "Yeah, we feel terrible," like mid semester. And she would play like guided meditations for the first 5 minutes of class.
Mm.
There was one day in our Shakespeare class, we literally all laid down on the floor and did like a 5 minute guided meditation and then had
Awesome.
class after that. And it was, I mean, that's the kind of compassion that I never received in high school. I mean, my high school classes were like get in the little desk and make flashcards, so
Yeah,
it's so refreshing to have that kind of movement in the classroom.
for sure. Well, I know that we've talked a little bit about that before at the last convention, because my paper was partially on that, where there's this,
Yeah,
the default mode is this sort of authoritarian structure of, I'm the teacher, I know everything, and you
yep,
guys are the dum-dums, and you're going to do what I say because I know what's best, and then you will regurgitate the information I gave you in specific ways, and it's
exactly.
very passive, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's so silly. I can't tell you how rewarding it is even to be in a classroom and say something to a professor and they're like, "Huh, never thought about that. That's a great idea." And then be
Yeah.
like, "You don't, okay, great." Usually if you, in my high school classrooms, if I said to my professor was like, "I've never heard of that." And then it's a shutdown and you're like, "Okay, I guess I'll never speak again."
Right.
It's just
Exactly.
the compassion is everything. But yeah, I totally agree that it's got to be a community moment or else it's
Hmm.
not worth it.
Well, and
Yeah.
I envision in my own mind personally, I envision the progress we make in the classroom is going to be this sort of like multi-layered thing, right? Where I think you're going to have to deal with the big things first before you can get to some of the more minutia, in which I specifically think about like the big thing being the student-teacher relationship. I think that's like the one of the big things to tackle first, and then after that, some of the improvements you can make then are things like the way the students interact with each other, whether it be
Yeah.
gender dynamics, because there's the whole sort of like men tend to be much more or tend to be encouraged to speak up much more and sort of speak
Hmm.
over women and that kind of thing. And then there's the general performative aspect that a lot of students can feel where it's like, oh, I want to make sure I don't look dumb in front of my other classmates.
Yeah.
And so I think there's layers to it, of course, but I think the big one has to be the student teacher relationship.
Yeah, totally. And I do think the student-student relationship is so important because, like you're saying, that feeling like you're not as cool as the other kids is
Right.
like that sucks. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember I don't definitely don't want to say anything bad about the CSU theater department because that is a phenomenal department and they've been doing amazing things for the past couple of years. But I will say that I personally felt a little bit of a hierarchy between
Mm.
the upperclassmen and the lowerclassmen when I was in that. And it always felt like such a competition to be the funniest or the smartest or the coolest, and
Yeah.
we're climbing on things. And I was just like, this is weird. And then I moved to the English department and all of my peers were so genuinely interested in like having good conversations and finding out what I
Mm.
thought and like making friendships. And I was like, oh, this isn't a competition. We're all in this together. This is great. And it totally lifted my spirits because I was like, oh, okay, this is what my kind of community feels like. And I do think some
Sure.
people like that competitive, who's going to get the
Sure.
lead. That kind of vibe really works for some people. But for me, I was like, oh, I don't like this competition I'm feeling, even if it was, I'm sure it was mostly self-imposed, but it
Sure.
totally slipped away once I was back with the English folk who were just
Mm.
lovely, and that kind of camaraderie is something I really, really value. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing that I think is so appealing to me personally about the idea of like going to an actual salon is having that kind of camaraderie where I think even within that environment, of course, there's going to be a little bit of jostling, of course, and there might be people trying to situate themselves and higher in relation
Yeah.
to others. And I think part of that might be human nature, the idea of like we're just sort of maybe a little more wired for whatever reasons to try to like one up other people in big or small
Hmm.
ways. Um,
Yeah.
but I think there are definitely ways, of course, to minimize that for sure.
Hmm.
And the question is sort of how do you do that in classrooms that are filled with people who are generally very much on the younger side and are figuring out so much about their own identity. And maybe because for a lot of people they go straight from high school to college,
Yeah.
um, and so you're still more or less in your adolescent years. You're still figuring out who you are, what you really want to do,
Yeah.
and a lot of that sort of those mental games around sort of oh, am I like a part of this group or am I a part of this group? Are still there. And I've noticed that
Yeah.
in my own classes where, in a lot of the classes that I've been in, whether they've been English or otherwise, I tend to find that even in a smaller class of only like, 20 people or something, um, there tends to be four, maybe five people who will speak more regularly, and then those sort of
Hmm.
become de facto like the smart ones or the ones that are just sort of
Yeah.
expected to ask the questions and to have insightful comments and that kind of thing. And well, then again, I'm not quite sure, but I can imagine it can be discouraging for other students who is like, oh well,
Yeah.
I don't want to ask a question that might seem dumb compared to the person
Yeah.
who just asked one before me or had this really
Yeah.
insightful comment. And it's like, how do
Totally.
you
And
encourage people to really speak?
yeah, and I think building a community within the classroom can super help with that because I mean,
Hmm.
once you if you I mean it's way easier with smaller class sizes, so that is maybe
Right.
something too, but having the feeling like the person you're sitting next to is someone you know, it's so much
Mm.
easier to start a conversation that way. I took a Latin class in college.
Oh,
It all
nice.
I took 4 semesters of Latin, which is so silly, but my first semester there were like 16 of us. So small class size, but I mean it's 6 p.m. Latin or something. So it was like
Hmm.
no one was super invested. And by the
Right.
end of the fourth semester, there were 3 of us in there, 3 students and the professor. And by
Uh,
that point, we were all, friendly and we chatted. And I felt way less ridiculous being like, oh, I still don't understand the third declension when it was just the 3 of us. And, we've
sure.
got a text thread. And like, it totally takes the pressure off of like that big lecture hall of like 300 people think you're an idiot if you say something stupid, like that kind
Mm.
of pressure is totally, totally there and something that, and that's smart
Right.
kids versus dumb kids. You asked me before if there's anything about the school systems that need changing. And I will say that in younger, I think that the gifted program, at least in Georgia, um, the gifted program is something that needs to be taken a firm look at because that is not, I was part of the gifted program and it did not work. And that was something that was
Sure.
really, that created the smart kids, dumb kids, which is not what the gifted program should have done. And at some point,
Right.
I mean, when you get to high school, you just have a G on your schedule. And that
Hmm.
means that the school system is getting a little extra money for you in the class,
Right.
like it's not an effective way to address kids' different learning styles and different
Hmm.
aptitudes in certain things. It's just, and I certainly shouldn't have been in any gifted science classes, don't, that's a terrible idea. So
Sure.
I think that's one of those things that, you know, secondary education, there's a big issue with that sort
Hmm.
of dynamic of having gifted kids. And it's even the name gifted is just
Yeah. Yeah.
not good, not super, because kids feeling like they're superior and other kids feeling lesser. It's
Right.
just
Right.
not a good way to make people feel excited about education, even,
Hmm.
you know?
Well, yeah, because I've had that conversation before with some people where, I can sort of understand people on different sides of this issue where, on the one hand, philosophically speaking, it makes sense to say like, okay, of course you're going to have descriptively speaking sort of differences in aptitude, and some people, if you were to
Yeah.
put it on like a bell curve, are going to be on sort of the tail end, on sort of the positive end, are going to be like sort of geniuses. Um,
Hmm.
and so how you're going to teach them is going to be different than how you would teach people who are within sort of the regular standard deviation, or maybe a few standard deviations to the left. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't think culturally we really see it that way. Culturally, when we think of somebody as smarter in a descriptive sense, so they have a stronger aptitude, we tend to automatically then assume a normative value of them being better in some sort of
Yeah.
intrinsic sense, and that I think is one of those things that's really hard to separate, because you can sort
Yeah.
of logically know that like, okay, I might be just smarter in this, but like that doesn't mean I'm better. But it's very tempting for it to be like, oh no, actually, like maybe I'm a little better, especially if you're getting
Yeah.
preferable treatment and all of that stuff.
Totally. Yeah. It's it's a mess. And
Yeah, it
that's
definitely is.
something that really creates tension among kids who, I mean, growing up is hard, adolescence is hard, puberty is hard. There's
Yeah.
enough issues in kids having relationships with other kids as it is, when you add an extra layer of this one's gifted and this one's not,
Right.
there's so much going on that needs to be addressed. And I totally agree. There needs to be a way to evaluate kids and help them get the best education they can, but maybe
Sure.
not label one as gifted and one as the B group,
Right.
there needs to be some
Yeah.
reevaluation of how things are going. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a tricky one for sure. I wonder if maybe sort of there needs to be some sort of cultural shift to help
Yeah.
facilitate that a little bit, because yeah, I mean, even for those who are gifted, in one field or another, or just have a higher aptitude for whatever, it's not like they can really take credit for that. I mean, you can
Yeah.
take credit, of
Yeah.
course, for the work that you put in to enhance whatever sort of skill you have, but you don't really get to take credit for like being naturally good at something.
Totally.
But we
And I
generally
mean,
tend to assume that they should.
yeah. And even putting the pressure on kids to live up to their potential. I have one of my
Right.
best friends from high school was, she graduated like fifth in our class or something stupid, and she was gifted the whole time, and,
Mm-hmm.
perfect attendance since like kindergarten, genius.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, no. And she has a college degree, but she is working full time at Disney now, and she
Mm-hmm.
loves it. She is so happy. She's so
Nice.
fulfilled. She's doing exactly what she wants to be. She's in exactly the environment she wants to be. And
Mm-hmm.
some people are like, oh, not living up to, you should be a scientist. But like, that's not, people shouldn't have to go with the societal expectation of what they
Right.
are smart enough to do. That's so ridiculous and beyond comprehension to me. So I think, yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's needs to be a reevaluation of what we expect from kids and how we treat them and how we treat young
For sure.
adults who maybe don't know what they want when they're going into college, because
Mm-hmm.
gap years can be really great. And yeah,
Well, and that pressure, can be really heavy, especially on people who are sort of naturally gifted, or just doing really well, at a young age, because there can be so much pressure to stay at that level, that
hmm
especially if you are sort of introduced to that at a young age, um, there can be this sense of like, this is who I am, and so if I don't continually get A pluses, if I don't continually get perfect attendance and all these things, I'm failing as a person, as opposed
yeah,
to I'm just sort of not doing as well as I was before.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and it's a very tricky thing where it can be a fine line to walk, where you want to
yeah,
push people to do their best, but at the same time you don't want them to invest their whole identity in their performance of whatever that thing
totally.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Awesome. All right. Well, I wanted to say once again, thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
here, for being a part of this. Of course, I will absolutely stay in touch because I think you're an awesome
yeah,
person. I
definitely.
loved your paper and
Ditto.
everything. I remember
Yes, ditto.
it was Forster's. Was it Maurice or what was it? It was
Yes,
Forster's.
it was
Yes, it was.
Maurice. Yeah, yeah, it was. I was looking at the reception of it when it was written versus
Mm,
now versus when it was published. So yeah, it was
right.
on paper, and I had a blast at conference. I think it was
Awesome. Are you going
so
to go again
awesome.
next year? Do you think?
I really want to. I have to figure out what the alumni rules are now. I've got to
Mm,
join the alumni association and get all the boxes checked and do whatever I have to do, because I mean, and
gotcha.
I got home to my chapter because I was the only one from my chapter that went, and I was like, "Hi, chapter, welcome home. Everyone's going next year." I was like, "You guys have got." I talked to them
Yeah,
so much because I was like, it was such a wonderful experience.
that was
I
so
just
good.
had a
Yeah.
blast. Yeah, awesome.
Awesome. Well, I can't give you any insider information, but well, I can tell you that I am part of the committee that is going over the convention and everything in
Ooh,
Denver, and I can tell you that there are some talks about how we decide who's alumni and such, and maybe expanding that a
ooh,
little bit or making it a little easier. So,
okay.
so
Cool. Well, I
be on the
will
lookout for
keep my
that.
ear peeled. Yeah, for sure. I definitely will.
All right. Well, I just want to close this out with what I just called like a fun question, sort of like,
Okay.
um, I think one of the podcasts I listen to, the fun question that he'll use is, if you have the ability to reopen Jurassic Park, do you think we should? And I think that's like an interesting one. But
Yeah,
I,
that is.
yeah, but I actually have one specifically for you, that
Okay,
I'm curious
good,
to
because I'm not
hear.
sure if my stance on Jurassic Park is super funsy.
Well, for yours, since you're really interested in a lot of sort of medieval literature and such, I assume you have like a favorite sort of medieval author.
Oh yeah, I do. Unfortunately, I pick the Gawain poet every time. I think that Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and also the Pearl, which are the two Gawain poet
Hmm,
attributed for Sherzy's works, are just so cool and lusciously written. Lots of adjectives, which I love, and lots of
gotcha.
description and spookiness. So I think the Gawain poet is my favorite. And I'm Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was like my first love. So I
Ah,
think the
gotcha.
Gawain poet. I have mad respect for Mallory and Bede and all of the oldies, but
Hmm.
Gawain poet's my choice. It's a good question though. Oh,
All right. Well, the question that I have for you in terms of when it comes to your favorite author is you are given two choices. So
oh
the first
gosh.
choice is you can go back in time and sort of you'll live at that time, but you'll be close friends with this author, but you will be poor, and of course you'll have
Mm,
all the issues of living in the medieval times,
mm.
in all that you are, or they can live now in modern
Ooh.
times, but you will never be able to meet or talk to them.
Oh gosh. That's such a hard question. I man, I'd probably get the plague as soon as I went back,
Mm,
but it might be worth it to pick the Gawain poet's brain a little bit and get some insider information for my own satisfaction. I think I would go back and
yeah.
but then if I brought him back, then there was so many more greatest hits. I think I would go back. I think that's my final answer. I think I'd
Mm.
go back and live the rough peasant life as I am and
It would definitely be
burn as
rough.
a witch or whatever, whatever
Right.
the punishment. But I think it'd be worth it to see the thing in its making and to hear the original voice. I think that would be beautiful.
Oh,
It's a
sure.
good
Yeah.
question though.
Thank you.
It's a great
Thank you.
question. Oh, good one.
I try to make these difficult because
Yeah.
was it the last one that I did was oh yeah, it was another one where you have two options because I like the ones where you're given two choices, but like there's
Yeah.
always a big trade off for either one.
Would you rather
Um,
kind of thing. Yeah.
right. And so the other one that I had asked was um, you can travel anywhere in the world for free, but you can only visit touristy locations.
Oof.
Or whenever you travel to anywhere in the world, you'll always go to the best places. You'll meet sort of like the locals and the best food and all that stuff, but it'll cost three times as much.
Oh gosh. That's a really rough question. You're good at coming up with these questions though.
Oh, well, thank you.
Man, I don't even know what I would do. I'm pleading the fifth on that one and let the
Fair.
first interviewee, that'll be their issue because that's a
Gotcha.
good one though.
All right. Well, I mean, thank you. I mean, thank you so
Yeah,
much. I really, really appreciate
thank
it.
you.
I'm
Absolutely.
so glad I got to meet you at the convention last term and
Yeah,
we were able to swap info and stay in touch because I super appreciated your paper and I was like, ah, this is somebody I want to keep in touch with. This is somebody who's interesting. I mean, there was
yeah,
of course
that's
plenty of interesting people there, but
oh yeah, it was phenomenal. But yeah, I'm glad we bumped into each other and got to connect. Yeah, it was thank you for inviting me to this. This was awesome.
yeah, no problem. And maybe I will see you at the next convention.
Yeah,
Hopefully
fingers
so
crossed
in
for sure.
Denver. Yeah.
Yes, Denver. Got my fingers
Alrighty.
crossed. Hopefully we'll be there.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right. Well, you have a great day. Hopefully we can chat soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
All right. Have a great day.